Hello there, this is Fiona, host and main GM for What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. This is a bonus Q&A episode to tide us over to the next one-shot, and it's indeed a very special Q&A. As this week, I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Dr. Gary Coleman, one of the trustees of Game Therapy UK, a charity set up to promote therapeutic gaming in the UK for public benefit. Game therapy is similar to drama therapy, in that players can act out scenarios in a safe, controlled, psychologically informed environment to facilitate creativity, imagination, learning, insight, and growth. However, it differs from traditional drama therapy in that it uses collaborative tabletop role-playing games to intentionally achieve these therapeutic goals. Game Therapy UK provides evidence-based therapeutic games to groups at risk of social isolation. These include a wide range of groups such as people experiencing homelessness, people in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, people experiencing neurodivergence, and military veterans exposed to psychological trauma or PTSD. It was great to speak to Gary about the important work of Game Therapy UK and highlight the positive impact tabletop RPGs can have for folks, regardless of their background or experience. As I always say, tabletop RPGs are for everyone, no matter who you are. I'll put a link to where you can find out more about Game Therapy UK and their work on the What Am I Rolling website and in this episode's show notes. So we're just going to start really nice and simple. Could you introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
I'm Gary Coleman and I do a bunch of things, but I'm the chairman for Game Therapy UK. It's a therapeutic gaming charity.
So how did you get into role-playing games to begin with? Were you like a dungeon master or a game master, or were you a player? Are you a mixture of the two?
I'll tell you what it was. I started playing ages ago. So, I mean, obviously your listeners can't see how old I look. So I'm like in my late 50s now, 57. And so I started like back in the day. I was a kid in the Northeast. I grew up in the Northeast and there was a shop back in the 70s or early 80s called Beatty's, which was like a toy shop, like a model train shop. My dad was into model trains. So I was dragged along and I kind of got into making model trains and little models. And I remember this shop full of model trains. Yeah. There was a little cabinet in the corner and a glass cabinet, a glass case locked. And in it was this blue book with a dragon on it and a little knight with a sword saying something, I don't know what to say, like, but welcome to adventure. And it was the first sort of Dungeons and Dragons book. And I kept going to my dad like on a Saturday morning to buy model trains and bits of trees and things to make these dioramas. And I just kept looking at this case and I just like, wow, what's in there? It's so dangerous. They keep it locked in a case. You can't even touch it. And I had this imagination of what it might be. I had no idea. And it looked very grown up as well. It looked far more grown up than for me. But I loved the idea of it. And then I don't know when, months later, I remember being in a music class at school and this kid came in and he had this blooming thing under his arm, this little magical book. And we were in the same class, but I knew him, but we weren't friends. And I just sort of sidled up next to him and went, what you got there? And then he said, I got this thing. Wow. And he opened it up and we started reading it together. And it was the blue book. It was the first sort of, I'm not sure it was the first, it wasn't the first Dungeons Dragons book, but it was a very early version.
Early one, yeah.
That night I went on to his house after I had our teas, went on to his house. And we read it, and then we thought, oh my gosh, this is really complicated. It's not even a game. It's like an exam. It's like, like a series of questions. But you said, was I a player or GM? It was his book. So he decided, he went, this is mine. I want to play the game.
Oh.
Therefore, you have to be the guy who runs the game.
Whoa.
And at that point, there was only two of us.
Yeah.
And so he said, I know a couple of friends who don't go to our school, but I think they might be into this sort of stuff. Because even then, I think we knew it was like a bit nerdy and we might get beaten up if we told anybody. It felt like kind of secret. And it felt sort of transgressive to have this book.
Yeah.
And that was it. I read this book. I think I was like one page ahead of them in the rules. So I knew one page more rules than they did. And that was just about enough. Mm-hmm. It came with an adventure called Into the Unknown. I remember that. And it was basically, back then, it was TSR were making it. And the dungeons were just crazy graph paper graphs. It made no logical sense why this dungeon would exist. Mm-hmm. And also it was only half the rooms had something in them. Half the rooms were empty. I think the idea was you got your pencil and you made up what was in the other rooms. And I just loved it. I loved the idea of writing and drawing and making games. And that was it. I was kind of I was then hooked. I guess I was like 12 years old or something, 13. I played first edition when they came out. We bought those. We played all of those. And actually, that was Dungeons and Dragons I was playing.
Yeah, I was going to say, was there other systems?
Back then, I sound so old. It's like back in the ancient days when there were dragons. But it wasn't that long ago, was it? But it wasn't that long ago. But then there was like a magazines were out. So I used to go, there's another shop that would sell miniature figures, like a little tiny shop. And in the corner of the shop, they sold like a handful of miniature figures and magazines. And they had magazines with Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine, the official sort of D&D magazines. But then there were loads of other magazines, like loads of indie magazines back then. And one of them was this White Dwarf, which was became Games Workshop. And, so the magazine back then, White Dwarf magazine, it was kind of rules agnostic. So there'd be Dungeons and Dragon games in there, but there'd be these Call of Cthulhu games and there'd be Trolls and, Tunnels and Trolls games. Anything and anything. It was, swords and sorcery, something and something, something and something. And so I think back then you kind of would read all of these it just felt very much more rules agnostic. It was just everything.
Wow.
I think back then, and a lot of it was just making stuff up. It didn't seem to be as prescriptive, maybe as it is now. And I loved it. It was brilliant. That's how I got into it.
It's kind of interesting because a lot of the stuff I get, like I found like copies of Dragon on the Internet Archives. They put it, for free, all the issues on there. So I've had a bit of a download myself, and it's fascinating to because obviously they have the adverts in and all that sort of thing, and it appeals to such a wide range of people. Yes. I can tell, Gary, you're a storyteller because you started about like, there's this magical MacGuffin in a clocked box. For you, then, when you're telling stories, obviously either as a GM or just as a collaboration thing, what kind of stories do you like to tell? Is it high fantasy mostly, or do you like to dabble with different RPG systems or genres?
So, but I mean, back then I was, I think Star Wars had just come out, that kind of epic storytelling and that space fantasy had just come out. So I was kind of into that. And so I was probably watching a lot of sci-fi and I was probably reading sci-fi. I'm not sure if Star Wars is sci-fi, but that was space opera kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'd just read Lord of the Rings, probably. I probably hadn't read Lord of the Rings that much earlier than I got this game. What was it? So I think all of it really, it just kind of appeals to me, fantasy. Now I probably do more medieval fantasy stuff. I kind of play a lot of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons really, and I'm sort of writing games in that kind of world, I think. I'm not sure that's preference. That's probably as much marketing. Everybody seems to be playing it. And if you want to play games, that's kind of what it's like. It's a bit like music I'm not really a muso, but people who are into music, and you go, what band do you like? They seems to me they always will say the most obscure band that you've never heard of. And you go, oh, brilliant. And then you get to know them and you go, they don't really listen to that at all. They're listening to, Coldplay. I think we all kind of go, what's the most esoteric thing I like a lot of people, I just play the games that are common and popular. I suppose D&D is very popular, isn't it?
I love the idea that you kind of made the analogy that D&D is Coldplay.
Isn't it though? But it is though, isn't it?
It really
That's the
is.
sad thing. It is Coldplay. Nothing wrong with Coldplay.
True. Either that or like U2 would be the other one as well, I guess.
Yes.
But it's true. Like again, for me, most of my games, I'd say about sort of 80% of them, I've run regular D&D, but obviously with the podcast, I try and do different RPG systems and stuff.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, for me, it's just a way to tell different stories and just to try stuff out. Because I find stuff like this absolutely fascinating. Like looking at the mechanics, what stories we can tell, and sort of go from there. Essentially, it sounds like from what you were talking about with those magazines and stuff, just being able to draw stuff and then. It sounded less prescriptive, as you were saying, rather than now, which is like, definitely. It has to be. Like, the rules didn't matter. You could be like, it's fine. Even though there seemed to be a lot of rules, but you could be just like, it's fine.
I don't think anybody really knew the rules back back. I don't think people, even now, I think people didn't know the rules. There weren't podcasts. They weren't. You couldn't watch YouTube and have experts tell you what to do. So you just had to read them yourself and try and work it out. And I think a lot of it was just people kind of misunderstanding it, or even maybe not. I think the rule was kind of just make it up. There were never rule books. These were kind of guidebooks. This is a way of playing it. You make your rules up. It's very difficult to monetize that, isn't it? It's much easier to monetize rules. So to reproduce rules is a way of making money.
It's always funny when I talk to game designers and I'm like, what's one tip people, if they wanted to run your game? And always they go, probably read the rules and buy my rule book. And I was like, that's fair.
So you asked about stories and things. And I think with the games, I mean, they aren't stories, they are games. They're not, I think that's important for me because I write games, I write stories. But they are more game than story. But I'm really not that interested in the rules. I've discovered I don't really care what the rules are. I find the rules are they're just there. And you could actually play, sometimes you play rules. You can play, I play games with rules light or almost rules zero where there are no rules.
Mm.
And it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. I think the important thing is how well the game, the module, that is written, the story bit of it is written. I think
Yeah.
that's what interests me at least.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think certainly now there is a sort of turn with actual players online and streaming and stuff. Rules are less important to create story. And it's interesting. So for me, I'm an improviser and I teach improv, and I'm trying to get role playing mechanics into improv just to get us more interesting scenes. And it's fascinating to see people, improvisers in general, they have certain rules like, yes and all that sort of thing. But as soon as you give them a rule of like, I need you to like speak like a monologue, but as if you're writing a letter to someone, and the person can't respond until you finish the end of the letter. They find it really difficult because they've never had to monologue for a long time. Or usually if they monologue, it's usually all over the place. When I'm saying you've got to be concise and maybe describe what the letter is like or anything like that, and do some world building. So a lot of my stuff is about like, okay, how do we get people to become game masters as well? Because obviously it's a big leap from being a player to maybe a more active player to then being like, I'm helping with the facilitation of the story and all that sort of thing. So I absolutely find it fascinating how realistically it's not about the rules per se. I find them very interesting, but at the same time, the story is the most important thing, and being able to collaborate with other players about it. But some people go, oh, but I need to learn all this math.
Yeah, you really don't.
You don't really.
No.
And it's all about the cool thing and making people feel like they've contributed to a story and had that cool moment per se, or have the tragic moment of, if there is loss, or, like the villain got away and stuff like that. And it's just that, I don't know, this is something, again, we're able to explore certain themes in a safe place. I just find it really fascinating, and obviously great, certainly after the pandemic. So
yeah, it'd be interesting to see if somebody timed a game, how much time you actually spend doing something that is rules based, and how much time you spend doing something that is just story based. Because I think when I'm playing as a player or as a GM, I think most of the time you're kind of in story mode, aren't you? No one's really asking for a dice roll. They are just moments. Most of you'll be playing for 3 or 4 hours. Most of that time is kind of in story mode, I think. And there's only a few moments where you do something where you'd have to go, I know what the rules are.
Or you need to clarify them in some way. I'm guessing you're more of a theatre of the mind person rather than using maps and minis yourself, or do you go between?
I appreciate all of it, I think. I mean, when we were kids, it was very much theatre of the mind, just because we didn't know any different, and we couldn't get minis, So I think when we did start getting minis, we'd probably have we had 10 lead minis, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then if they met a monster, it would be a rubber dinosaur or something. You know what I mean? It would be like a cow, a toy cow would come along. The miniatures were kind of used just to reference distance from each other more than anything. It was mainly just theatre of the mind.
Yeah.
And so I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah.
When everything went online during COVID, I thought, oh, this is not really going to work doing it online. But what I loved was the fact that you could turn your screen off and then you just get this disembodied voice,
Right. Yeah.
And again, it's like listening to a radio play where you just have to fill in all the gaps. And I think that is fun. So online, doing it where you're just this voice.
There is an improv format called the Bat, which basically everyone is sat in a circle, but their eyes closed, and you do a soundscape, and then you take turns about who's doing in the scene, and then moving from scene to scene. And it's all done through just vocal and no visual cues. Right. And I was saying thing as well, like some people really struggle, obviously, because sometimes they need to see the people like engaging or see their reaction stuff, and I absolutely get that. But there is something, like you said, radio play like, and yeah, sure, there'll be people talking over each other, but that's okay. Yeah. Like we'll manage. Like, it's not too awkward. I mean, we do it all in real life as well. But I'm a big fan of just like listening in to hear the pauses and to hear
the silence, the dread.
So good. Yeah, like
especially doing horror. Obviously, you want whatever you show them is not going to be as horrific as what they're imagining. So don't show them anything. Just let them. But then after COVID, we went back to playing live, and I still play online. I play with a charity. I play with a game with military veterans, and that's all online because they're all around the country. I also play a game with people experiencing homelessness, and that's face to face in a hostel. And it's lovely when you get back face to face, and you do get the little tiles out, and you get miniature figures, and you get your hands on a dice, and you get to clunk things around a table, and that's awesome as well. That's just the exact opposite, but it's brilliant. I mean, it's all lovely, isn't it? It's all fun.
Different things for different people, isn't it? Like, I very much appreciate it. And it's the same with improv as well. We do online, we do in person, and there's different things for convenience and stuff. But definitely the first game we came back after being away for so long, it felt very, very special. RPG therapy. So how did that come about?
So I've been sort of playing role-playing games for forever and ever and ever. And I qualified as a doctor. So I was very lucky when I was a kid. I wanted to be a doctor, I think. And so I went off and I was very lucky. I scraped through some exams and I went off to medical school. And I was a doctor in the army for a while. So I did all of that. And I was kind of out sort of just I probably wasn't playing much role-playing games then. I was a bit busy. I was all over the world, just playing.
Yeah.
I was kind of doing it for real, really, running around, having adventures for real. And then when I left the army, I came back and I started working again as a doctor. And I work 1 day a week in London. I live in London now. I work 1 day a week doing end-of-life care for people experiencing homelessness in London. And it was during COVID. We were still working. I was chatting to a pal who is a complex support care worker with homeless people. And he'd also played Dungeons and Dragons since he was a kid. And we were just wondering, we were just curious. We'd heard of people in America using game therapy or geek therapy or D&D therapy, whatever they were calling it. And we were both kind of aware that they're using it for people with trauma. And the clients that we had were largely, maybe all of them had a history of some degree of trauma, psychological trauma, complex trauma. And we just thought, I wonder if it would be helpful playing D&D. I wonder what that would be like. Also, we were aware that in terms of sort of social isolation, people are experiencing homelessness, not necessarily street homeless, people in hostels, homeless hostels, spend hours and hours and hours a day isolated. They often spend a lot of time in their room. And again, we just thought, well, it would just be a good way of bringing people together and socializing them and giving them just a fun experience. So this was during COVID. We thought, let's just do a little trial, just the two of us. We'll get together and we'll play a game of Dungeons and Dragons with some of other clients experiencing homelessness for a few weeks, for a few months, and see what it's like. That's what we started to look at. And as we were setting this up, we started to speak to other people in the UK because we were aware of the American experience, but America's got a very different healthcare system.
Yes.
I think, it's all very much in the marketplace. And I think the other thing is, I certainly had a very sort of cynical NHS chip in my brain going, yeah, all this stuff I'm reading, is it research or is it just marketing? Because they're in the marketplace. They're very nice people, but they are competing against one another.
Absolutely.
Of course they're going to say it works because they're selling them their product.
Yeah.
So we went out on social media, Facebook, I think, asked for a bunch of people on the groups, hey, anybody any experience of doing any kind of therapy or therapeutic work with role-playing games in the UK? And we got in touch with a bunch of people who we're still talking to, and they all came back. And the one thing that they said was, I think they'd all also experienced that sort of cynicism as in, is it really working? But they all said, when you start doing it, it's really profound, the effect. It is so profound. It really does seem to have an impact for people who want to play the game. But the problem that they had and that we were experiencing was it's a bit nerdy. So it's a bit it's very difficult to get funding. It's very difficult for anyone to take you seriously when you say we've got this idea of doing something therapeutic. Oh, what is it? We're going to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
What? Wouldn't it be lovely? There's some kind of umbrella organization which just shared the knowledge that, because we were reinventing the wheel. All these little groups around the UK were reinventing the wheel. How do we set up these projects in our system, not the American system? Wouldn't it be nice if there's some kind of just repository of knowledge? Wouldn't it be nice if there's some organization that could help us get funding, who could tell us what to do, help us support? And so the group, all of us, we just got together and went, well, let's just create it. Let's just make let's make something. So we set it up as a charity. It's a registered charity now, Game Therapy UK. And the idea is it's very kind of collegiate as well. We're not in the marketplace. There's nothing private about it. It's very, we're there to share our resources now, knowledge, and just everyone kind of pitching in, gamers, clinicians, educators, whoever wants to get involved. And we're developing these games. We're playing games therapeutically for public benefit. So it's not in the marketplace at all. I know it's all research based as well. So all of our projects are going to be research based. And that research we're going to publish freely.
Amazing.
And just try and find out the evidence base for this thing, therapeutic gaming. What's the best way to play it? What's best practice, I suppose? How do you play the game and make it as therapeutic as possible?
I always bring up this article from the BBC, I think a little while ago, and it talked about loneliness in people in big cities is so big, but we don't see it because obviously people are busy and they just get on. And then, of course, there are articles now about saying, "Oh, well, Dungeons and Dragons saved my life. It's something at my little
Mm.
touchstone, and I can go and do this every week." And I'm sure other like sports and all that sort of thing do the same thing. But it was fascinating to
That
me,
sort of thing.
that sort of thing. I mean, who
That
goes outside
nonsense.
anymore? Yeah,
It'll never catch on. Sport.
It'll
What?
never catch on. But I found it interesting because a lot of the people that were interviewed in that particular article about loneliness in big cities like London
Mm.
were people in their 20s, 30s, like early 40s, like people
Yeah.
I would necessarily assume that they have it together in quotation marks. But it was just like, yeah, but actually,
Yeah.
I'm just left out of the humdrum life. And it's
And I think
just,
also
yeah.
you can be incredibly lonely and still be in a group. And
Hmm.
and also you can have quite a good social group and still be socially isolated within that group. So
Hmm.
I think when I was a kid, looking back on it, I think I was probably quite a lonely kid. I had a very lovely family and a very close family, and I had friends, but I think I spent a lot of my time alone. You know,
Hmm.
through choice to an extent,
Yeah.
but I was quite alone, and these games were probably my only real social groups that I had. I didn't play
Hmm.
sports, that'll never catch on.
No, never
I
catch
thought
on.
that's football nonsense. So to me, it was a social outlet.
Hmm.
And then, you get your, even like now, I mean, I'm now in my 50s, whatever. And I think I'm kind of quite outgoing.
Mm,
I probably appear quite outgoing, but I think I'm quite a quiet person in reality. I'm quite
mm,
shy in reality.
mm,
And certainly compared to like my wife, because my wife has got a really rich social network of good friends, whereas
mm.
I have people who I know who I play Dungeons and Dragons with, and
Yeah,
they're like friends, but it needs the game probably to hold us together. So
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we do various groups within the
Mm,
charity. We're still a very young, new charity.
mm,
And the groups, I mentioned homelessness. So we're doing
mm,
groups, we're running games for people experiencing homelessness and through that, people in addiction recovery and also
mm,
um, other sort of subgroups like survivors of modern day slavery who are experiencing homelessness. So we do all of that. Other groups that we started very early on. I think I might mention I was in the army. I used to be a doctor in
yeah.
the army.
Mm,
And so another group that we set up quite quickly was an online group for military veterans and also serving personnel as well.
mm,
And I'm telling you this because again, just this idea of sort of isolation. So we set this group up, and again, I don't feel like somebody who's isolated at all. I think I've got quite a interesting social life, and we set these games up online.
yeah.
And here was me sort of setting these games up to be the great sort of heroic person who sweeps in
I'll
and
do it.
helps.
Yeah.
I'll help you, people.
I'll run the game. Don't
Don't
worry.
worry, I'll save the day. And so we set these games up, and I was GMing these games, and I was ex-military myself, and we were doing these games for these veterans who
Mm,
were, it was a test, it was like an alpha test to
yeah.
see if it worked.
Mm,
And we played this game. We've been playing it for like a year and a half now, coming up second
mm,
year. But one of the things I realized was that I was playing this, I was GMing these games. I really loved them. I
yeah.
was finding it incredibly therapeutic being part of this trial with these military
Mm,
veterans. And I'd left the army 20 years ago, and having a great social life. But what I realized was, what I remembered was, I was isolated from people who had a military experience. So I'd spent
mm,
14, 15 years in the military. It's a very specific kind of world that you're living
yeah,
in.
of
There's all this
course.
stuff going on.
Yeah.
And then I'd left 20 years ago, and I hadn't thought about it. It hadn't bothered me at all until I met these people who were either still serving or had gone through it as well. And it was just suddenly like, oh, crumbs, I hadn't realized I'd missed this. I miss
Mm,
chatting to these people who've had the same experience. We haven't even got to talk about the experience. It's just
mm,
knowing that they've had the shared experience. And
yeah.
there's that kind of thing as well, where you don't feel like you're socially isolated, but you're
Mm,
maybe isolated from a group of people who have a shared experience.
yeah.
And it
Yeah.
could be anything. It could, that was about being military veterans. It could be, we're looking at groups of people who've got neurodivergence. It could be that. It could be as in, actually,
Mm,
I'm now able to contact with other people who are neurodivergent, and we've got that shared thing. We haven't got to
mm,
talk about it. We just know. Or it
yeah.
could be a gender issue or a sexuality issue, or it could be a shared anything. It's just a group
Mm.
of people going, well, this is nice to have an opportunity to meet these
Yeah.
people.
And be safe in the fact that
Yeah.
if something comes up, people are like, oh, yeah, don't worry, and move on, or be able to
Yeah,
empathize with it rather than you having
totally.
to be like, I have to explain why I did this or why I feel like this and
Yeah.
all that sort of thing.
It is about empathy. And I think the games are
Mm.
very good at generating empathy as well. They're just
Yeah.
being playful and playing games is very good at
Yeah.
empathy.
When you're GMing then for these groups,
Mm.
is it mostly published adventures? Is it stuff that you create, or do you take any input from the folks around the table? Like, what do they want to do? I guess because obviously obviously game therapy, you're not necessarily, psychoanalyzing these people. This is just to give them a space to play through and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So I just wondered
Yes.
how do you accommodate, but how do you tailor the sessions to your groups?
So, well, first of all, just to mention about the kind of the game therapy, therapeutic gaming bit,
Yes, please.
because that was just mentioned then. So I think again, the American model compared to maybe our model, in the American model, it is again, it's very kind of privatized. And what they do is, and I'm not criticizing, it's just the way they
No,
work.
please.
So I think their model is generally, they're the therapist, there's somebody who say, I'm a therapist, I'm a whatever qualification I have, and I am going to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons or Cthulhu. I'm going to play a game with you. And during that game, this will become therapy. I'll be using therapeutic modalities during this game. And that's how they do it. And then you pay them some money and you play a game and that's it. I think our model is different. Our model is, we think the game itself is just therapeutic. We're democratizing it. You don't need to be a clinical psychologist or a psychologist or an anything. You just need to be players and just need to be gamers. As long as you play the game thoughtfully, I think there's certain things that you can learn to do that make it more likely to be a therapeutic experience than not. There's always a risk it could be a toxic experience. If anything is therapeutic, if anything has an effect, there's always a chance that there'll be like a side effect or an ill effect. So you just need to be wary of that and try and avoid those things. You can't always avoid those things. Sometimes you will just hit a landmine and something will happen. And then you just have a bit of thoughtfulness or training as to how to navigate your way around that. And then you keep on playing this, making the game as therapeutic as you can be. So I think that's the first difference. And so again, I think it comes from our attitude, which is kind of much more collegiate and democratic and for public good rather than for private gain. I think that's the first thing we do. We're playing these therapeutic games. The other bit is, and some of the groups that we're going into, some of the groups are very kind of normative, like the veterans. Really, the only shared commonality is that they've all have either served in the military or they are serving in the military.
Right.
But they don't have to have any mental health conditions. They haven't got to be socially isolated. They're just people playing a game. That's their only shared experience. We are moving towards the veterans, a group for people who've just got post-traumatic stress disorder. That's slightly different because everybody in that group has got a vulnerability.
Yeah.
With the people experiencing homelessness group, I mean, pretty much everybody who has experienced long-term homelessness probably has got a vulnerability. I mean, I think just being homeless itself is traumatic, and a lot of the causes of homelessness could be trauma. So for those groups, the game itself, we play the game, it's just normal games. The game itself is therapeutic. But I think for those groups, we also would have in a therapist.
Right.
So, but the therapist isn't doing therapy necessarily during the game. They're watching the game or they're playing the game. Or they're in the room, they're in that space. But then in between the games, there would be therapy. And it would just be therapy, normal therapy, whatever modality you want to use, whether it's psychoanalysis or CBT. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychological therapist. It would just be normal therapy. So you have therapeutic gaming and then just normal therapy. And that's the kind of models that we're using rather than some kind of game therapy thing. So that's how the kind of game therapy.
Yeah, very fascinating. Thank you.
Answer your actual question, what kind of games we play. When we set up any project, I think that we start off by all the projects are co-created or co-produced with the clients, and the clients could be a charity. So the client could be actually where homelessness charity, we want you to come in and help us work with our clients. So we'll sit down with the charity and say, this is what we want to do. Does this kind of fit your aim? So we can design a game to support that. And then of course the players, the actual, end clients, they sit around a table with us and go, right, we're going to play a game. What kind of game would you like to play? So we always do that. So people, it's the whole process, the whole game of all these games are collaborative, and the design bit starts off being collaborative. If they said, what we want to do is we want to play Dungeons and Dragons, Tomb of Horrors, well, we'll just pull it off the shelf and go, right, we'll play that. They tend not to. They tend to come up with ideas and we go, well, let's design a game around that.
Oh, fab.
Yeah. So usually the games are kind of bespoke. Invariably, we want to play something that's not Dungeons and Dragons, as in the charity. Invariably, people sit down and go, oh, let's play. And we have all these ideas, or come up with some bespoke thing, and we'll start playing a game. And invariably, after a couple of weeks, a month, they go, yeah, this is brilliant. Great. Can we play Dungeons and Dragons? And then, you go, right.
You're like, okay.
Just because it's just ubiquitous. It's out there, isn't it? Their marketing is definitely, Wizards of the Coast have definitely got the marketing. So eventually you go, yeah, okay, we'll play. But even then we'll probably be, rather than pulling something off the shelf, it'll be a home brewed campaign or a game. Because we want to, again, make it maybe just being thoughtful, especially if it's a vulnerable group, we're kind of aware of their vulnerabilities, and we go, there are just certain things, certain tropes that are really common through whatever game it is, whatever rule set it is. There are usually certain tropes with that game, and you go, yeah, well, we just need to be a bit thoughtful about that.
Careful, yeah, absolutely.
Alcohol, things like alcohol use.
Oh gosh, of course, yeah. Any tavern, you're like, let's get rid of those, or replace them in some way, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or alternatively, it can be that it kind of goes the other way. When we did the veterans group, we actually were talking to, there was the NHS, Contact First. The NHS was saying, could you look at designing a game for we've got some veterans with PTSD. Could you design a game for them? And we went, yeah, sure. I'm sure we could. There's a lot of evidence that computer games were very good for PTSD. And so we were looking at role-playing games. And then they asked a couple of questions that very sensibly, they said, could this be harmful, playing these games? Could it damage? Could it trigger PTSD in the veterans? And we went, yeah, it could do. So let's find out. So we just got this, we had about 50 veterans that we were talking to who all played games. And we asked them, anonymously, do you get triggered by playing any of these games? Because of course they could do. And there was a lot of PTSD within the group, and they came back and went, those with PTSD said, yeah, we do. We get triggered by playing these games. But that's kind of why we play them. We enjoy, we recognize the therapeutic benefit of experiencing it.
Right.
That was the clients, the veterans recognizing that. And then we're speaking to our sort of clinical psychologists in the trauma world, and they're all going, oh, yeah, brilliant. Because theoretically, that's what you'd expect to find. That would be the therapeutic benefit of playing the game. That you'd be in a safe space. You trigger these memories, and you'd re-experience the memory as if it was now, as you're back in that traumatic place, but you're not. You're in a safe space, and wherever it is, your amygdala's not firing up.
It's your character that's in this space. Yeah, absolutely.
And then you just kind of relearn to restore those memories as memories. So you still remember those traumatic events, but they're memories. Then you're not experiencing them viscerally as if that's happening to me for real now. Again, when we were designing the games for the veterans in particular, for example, we designed games that had lethality in them. We made them scary because we wanted to sort of have an element of triggering it in a thoughtful, safe way. So,
of course, yeah.
And in fact, the veterans asked for it as well, because we said to the veterans, what games do we want to play? And again, all the veterans were saying, like, oh, I want something dark like Cthulhu or vampires and death, and we want that kind of. It wasn't be Dungeons and Dragons, like first edition Dungeons and Dragons, when when you could get killed,
you're just like, dead. Right. Yeah, cat kills you. That's it. Yeah.
So we looked at those games, and then we said to all the players, because you have to get everyone to agree to a set of rules. And we said, that's brilliant, great, take that on board. What game do you actually all know? Everybody. What games does everybody know the rules of? And of course, it's Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. But we took sort of a 5th edition's rules, and then we just went, right, let's just homebrew the rules, and we make it more lethal, and we bring this stuff in, and then we have like this kind of eldritch horror element to the campaign, and it works well. So we kind of homebrew all of the games. So
that's really cool, because again, it obviously shows that you're passionate and you want to like create something that is bespoke that they will all enjoy it. For me, when I run streamed games, or when I put in pitches and they get accepted and stuff, a lot of my games are horror, just because that's what interests me. And I'll do the Lines and Veils, I'll do the Session Zeros and stuff. And it's always interesting to see, because obviously with an anonymous form, you can see like, okay, people don't want spiders, they don't want this, and certain things are always off the table, which is absolutely great. And then it's interesting when, because I ran an Alien RPG, which is obviously incredibly lethal and incredibly body horror, and there's still a couple of people going, oh, I don't like body horror, but I've applied to be in your show.
You have seen the film, haven't you?
You have seen these things, but obviously I know it's about like, okay, let's dive into it. What is it? Just, do you not want it to happen to you? Can you hear it? Is it off screen? All that sort of thing. So those tools really help me. But one thing I started employing. So I ran recently one of the second scenarios, which essentially is like the plot of like Aliens and a bit of Prometheus and all that sort of thing. And there's a part of it, because it is Marines in warfare. And obviously at the time of recording and at the time of streaming, there's a lot of warfare going on in the world. And so I had to sit down with my players going, look, I can't change this element of the story. And it's not glorifying it or anything like that. It's in the background, but we can bring it to the foreground if people would like to. I just want to make people aware that this is a thing. And I told them like various beats that there are people that are missing. You're going to go find them. Bad stuff's going to happen to them. That's fine. And then at some point, there's effectively some mysterious entity throws what is essentially a dirty bomb over this colony. and you have to get out. And I just said it in such simple terms, and you can see them going, oh. And I was like, I'm telling you this now because if that is not something you want to be a part of, I don't want you to feel like you're forced with it. These are story beats that can't be changed in this particular scenario because that's what, again, it's off the shelf. But I want to give you enough agency with these pre-generated characters we're using that you can, they can have relationships, they can be different genders, they can identify as whatever they want. I want you to make sure that you're safe and comfortable with what we're going to go through, and that everyone was on board, and we had such a really good time as a result. And I think sometimes there's that worry for GMs to be like, oh, I don't want to give away the story, and I don't want to spoil the surprise of a horrible thing. But actually, I find it much more freeing to tell people that these are the beats that are going to happen, and then when we get to them, obviously Panto players are like, oh no, it's time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. And it sounds a brilliant game. And also, but don't tell me the spoilers because I'm just about to start playing in Aliens. I haven't played Aliens yet. So the veterans group, one of the guys in veterans is going to GM Aliens. So I'm going to be a player in that. So don't spoil it.
Nope.
Although I have seen the film, I've got a vague idea what might happen.
Fine. Oh, I'm very excited for you then.
But that's the point, isn't it? Because it's such a rich world. Imagine if you're playing in Star Wars game, or you're going to play in a Star Trek game, or Doctor Who game, or whatever. You kind of know who the baddies are going to be. It doesn't spoil the game. If the Darth Vader flies past, I've never heard of Darth. What's Darth Vader? You know his entire backstory. You know everything about him. But your character doesn't, and you can still play that. And it's a game, isn't it? It's a game. It's playfulness.
Yeah, it's the same with Alien as well, though, because you think, well, it's given away slightly that it's called Alien. We know what the big bad is, but actually, when you talk about it with people, it's not just, obviously, the alien is the immediate threat, but corporations, the brutal reality of space, computers going against you, so that for me was just, it was when I was explaining this to people, because you don't need to know all the lore and all that sort of thing, but it was just fascinating because people going, oh yeah, and I was like, yeah, I think people just, that sort of tunnel vision going, an alien, and then you're like, but reality is far more scarier. So that's what I was going to ask you. So obviously you set up these obviously groups. Presumably you or another person in the charity runs it for a couple of sessions, or does a short campaign and then do other members of that group take up the mantle, or do you have sort of repeat the project? Like what's sort of the scheduling like, I guess?
So again, I think it depends upon, it's all bespoke really. So I think one of the things is when we set up projects, we probably say, we're going to run the project. I think 12 weeks is what we normally say. We'll run it for about, it's whatever people want to do, but we say about 12 weeks. And I think we've picked 12 weeks just because if you do CBT, the NHS is for 12 weeks. And we thought it sounds a bit like CBT. There we go. That's the honest reason why. It sounds a bit like a thing you would get off the NHS, 12 weeks. And 12 weeks sounds like long enough. You can play a campaign. And if it's about overcoming social isolation, then you probably want to allow people to form friendship groups, and 12 weeks is probably long enough to kind of form a little group and to play a campaign and to do that. And then also it just means that for us, if we're kind of measuring things, we've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. After 12 weeks, you can measure it and go, what impact has it had? So that's kind of how we normally do it. Having said that, what then happens at the 12-week point is we go, well, let's just extend it for another 12 weeks. And our project in Camden has been going for 2 years. Just 12 weeks after 12 weeks after 12 weeks. Our military campaign has been going for the longest one is in its second year now. We've got 2 other groups starting up, on a campaign. So that's quite usually happens. And I think we try and have a small, we'd like to have a small group of people playing collaboratively for long periods of time, because that's part of the enjoyment of the game. The way we design them is we design the sessions to be one shots though. So we appreciate that not everybody is going to play all the games, or they're going to drop in and out. So the game design usually it's a series of, it's like kind of West Marcher. So there's sequential one shots.
Yeah.
But most people turn up for all the games and they just play it like a campaign. I've learned a lot by doing one shots though. The discipline of writing, we try and have, it's impossible to do, but you try and have every session end with an ending and have that series feeling to it. The discipline of writing the games is brilliant. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that, because it totally makes sense. Because I was going to ask, I'm guessing it's weekly, and what do you do if people aren't there, and if people come in halfway through? But if you've set up the session like, it's very easy to quickly do a character, or here's some pre-gens, etc. And then it's up to you to be like, we've got this amount of time to have the adventure seed, etc. We're not going to do our cliffhanger. It just it is fascinating to do that, because I even though What Am I Rolling is a one-shot podcast, it's usually 4 hours and then split up obviously into episodes, but sometimes I'm like, I'm just gonna have to leave it there, and people are always like, oh, next time. And I was like, well, there isn't. But it's true. If you want to get it as a sort of satisfying
Yeah.
conclusion.
You want a satisfying conclusion. And wherever that ending is, you need to be able to, as the GM, go, we need to create something that feels like a satisfying conclusion.
Obviously, when you're running sessions, then for you, what is the most important thing to get across to the players? Or I guess, like, because it sounds like, again, you're doing your tailored session, you're writing the scenario and stuff. I'm guessing it's more the role play and creating a story element rather than, say, combat or exploration. Or is it a mixture of all those three, those sort of tenets?
I think it's, it is creating a rich world and a rich potential for story. It's creating, you want something to have, there's a world and there's the potential for conflict and all those elements of story. They need to be there, and it needs to sit in something that feels as if the illusion is, it is a full world. You kind of want to give that illusion, but it is also, it's a game, isn't it? You are playing a game. So it needs to have those beats of a game. It's you describe what's going on, and you want them to very, very quickly, in as few words as possible, just get the sense of it and the smell of it, and where this is the thing, and then to understand what the challenge is, what the problem is, and then you just sit there quietly and they play, they work out the problem, and then when they've solved that problem, you go, brilliant, and then here's the next bit of the problem, and everything is gamified. I think I hear people saying, I'm a forever GM. I think you're missing out. I think you should definitely be a player. I think you should definitely play in games.
Absolutely.
I learned how to be a GM by playing in games and going, oh, I really love that. I love that. I've been really lucky in that I've played in games with some brilliant GMs, way better GMs than I am. And I go, oh, I'll steal that. That's brilliant. So I love all of that. Or occasionally as a player, you'll go, do you know what? If I was a GM, I would think the player's not enjoying this. I'm loving this, so just is that kind of reassurance as well as a GM going, yeah, they're fine. They're okay. They're playing.
I'm 100% with you on that. Like, I'm also quite lucky that, again, through doing these podcasts and stuff like that, I have other GMs that come on and run stuff. And then, I go be a place somewhere else. And there'll be games and systems that I have no real knowledge of or touched them before, because I think very sort of judging books by cover, going, oh, that's not for me. And then they'll run a session and I go, oh, this was amazing. Like, I've played in so many sort of Warhammer RPGs where I've gone, I don't know if it's for me, and then I'm like, wait, this is totally for me, because I can be, it's Blackadder goes forth, easy, and it's fascinating because, again, maybe it's the way certain images don't necessarily appeal to me, or there's, again, lots of text, and then I'm like, I completely agree with that sort of thing. Like, if you're a GM and you're only running one system, that's fine, but try and get other players to do something, or, obviously there's online meetups and all that sort of thing, just to go and play in another game, even for a few sessions, and just, you gain so much knowledge. And I'm exactly the same, going, oh, that was really good. Yeah. I'll use that on Monday's session and see how that goes down, and be like, I had that in my back pocket this whole time.
But it is difficult, and designing games which work as games is hard. I mean, and again, that idea of just trying to design things. So when we're doing sessions, a lot of our sessions are quite short. So the guys, for people experiencing homelessness, I think that's like a 2-hour session.
Oh,
so
wow.
You've got to play a game in 2 hours. Ideally, you want to play a game in 2 hours. We're doing a schools, libraries and clubs one. And the schools one, they're saying they might have 60 minutes. So you've got to design a game that they can play from beginning to end in 60 minutes. And I love the discipline of that. And of course, you can't always do it. You can design a game that you can play this in 60 minutes. And of course, people spend the first 55 minutes trying to get through the door. But that's the game. That's the game.
It's the end.
It's not that difficult. But as long as having fun getting through the door, well, that's the game. The
game kind of doesn't matter.
It turns out the game is you getting through the door.
Yeah.
Come back next week and we'll find out what's in the room. That's fine.
I can't remember. It was at this year's UK Games Expo, like their version of awards and stuff. And I think it won. It's on my, I think it's just called Critical, and it's part board game, part role playing game, and it's like episodic, like 10 sessions, but they're half an hour long. That's what it said, and I was like, that can't be a thing, and it's got its own little rules set, all that sort of. It's a bit complex for my liking personally, but I was like, because the time, people just don't have the time to sit down and while away 6-7 hours of creating stuff. Like, we'd love that, but like you said, lives get busy, or you only have that 2 hours stuff. It's to keep the people's attention and keep them engaged. It's really difficult.
It's a really good discipline, and if people are listening to this and they're writing or designing games, I think it's really good to play really short games, because of course, then on the weekend you play the same game with your pals and you go, right, actually we're going to play for 6 hours because that's what we're going to do. And if you're playing through a campaign which has been designed to be played in 1 hour or 2 hour segments, it's great, because you just have these natural beats through the game where you go,
Mm.
oh, we've done this, right? Let's have a pizza. It just creates moments, and the game has its own pace designed into the game, So I think it's quite a good discipline is to be able to go, yeah, there's going to be these little short thing, and make sure it is gamified where there's plenty of
Yeah.
space for the players to play a game rather than just be sitting listening to a story or
Yeah.
just be rolling dice.
When you say gamified and stuff, again, this is just me, just out of interest. So, when you say it's a Dungeons and Dragons game, etc., obviously they're at a certain level. Do they level up? Do they gain magic items? All that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
just the usual sort of like, yeah, they got that reward, even if it's only for that session. Or
With some of the groups we do, often if we've got a group that's starting and the groups are all novices and they've never played a game before, we want to make it as easy as possible. We want to kind of get them playing the game pretty much straight away.
Yeah.
We have a group where we might sort of do printouts. We did one game again. Everybody wants to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And then we go, we're going to spend the first 2 hours explaining how to play the game. So we just gave them. We made what we called level 0 characters, and they're basically just like first level pre-printed character sheets. They just had to put the name and the race of the species of their character on there. And also, if they had a magical spell, the whole spell was written out for them exactly what they could do. It's just, not difficult. It's just, and then you would give them this bit of paper, assuming they're literate, give them this bit of paper and then say, right, we could start playing. You don't need to know any rules. Let's just, and then we started playing. We just get them in there and playing straight away. And then I think the campaigns that we play, they tend to, kind of level up quite quickly, I suppose, because in 12 weeks, you want to kind of get the experience of leveling up and getting a bit better and things. Yeah.
For people like who are interested in the sort of research that you're sort of putting into it, thinking about setting up their own club, whether it's at school or with certain groups and stuff like that, what sort of your big advice would be for running something like their own sort of thing? Like, I want to set up a club, I want to get people to get out of that social isolation, if you see what I mean.
And that's what we're all about, really. As I say, it's all about that kind of democratizing process. So if you want to, just do it. I mean, just do it and make it up. And that's the best way of doing it. Just do it, try it, and get better at it. We all here as a resource. So also do think about just dropping us a line and saying, hey, we're starting a club in this area. Any thoughts? Because either we can help or we can put you in touch with people nearby who can help you with your project. Or if you've got any questions, any mistakes that you're about to make, and you're going to make mistakes. Any mistakes you're about to make, well, we've already made those mistakes, so we can chat about that. We can help. We might be able to help with a bit of funding. We might be able to help getting. The industry is very generous towards the charity, and we've got a kit. I'm sat in my little sort of shed at the bottom of the garden, looking at boxes and boxes full of miniature figures and things that the industry have very kindly given to us to give out to people. So if you're starting up clubs, let us know. We'd love to get you on board and hear how your project's going, and if we can help, we'll help.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Gary. The final sort of question, which is completely unrelated to Game Therapy UK, so I appreciate it's like a wild card, but could you talk to us a little bit about your other project, Dorks and Orcs? If that's appropriate.
Totally. Yeah. So obviously, I've been playing sort of these games forever. I do lots of different things, and my main job is comedy. I work as a stand-up comedian, and I also do comedy production on various bits and bobs. And for years and years, I thought, do you know what? I think a Dungeons and Dragons type game would be a great concept for a panel show. Because a comedy panel show, like, Would I Lie to You or 8 out of 10 Cats, it's a very kind of British phenomenon, a comedy panel show.
It really is.
The idea of a comedy panel show, but it looks as if the comedians or the panel are playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. I thought that'd be a great idea because it's got jeopardy and it's got fun and it's got those moments where you have to roll the dice and that randomness of it all. And it's literally life and death kind of, pretended, but I thought it'd be really good fun. And so we started to develop that, and we've been developing it for a couple of years now. And so we've been playing it in pubs just to kind of get the hang of it, and we've been playing it online. We did a show up in Edinburgh.
I was going to say, you did the Edinburgh Fringe, didn't you?
Yes, we did it, and it was brilliant. It was like 120 seat room.
Wow.
We didn't even advertise. There was no advertising. We just went up there just to give it a go, and the room was sold out. And it was brilliant. It was just lovely doing it. And half the room were proper geeks who came up. We normally used to playing it at pubs to comedy audiences, and they were just like, half the room were geeks, and they just really got it. Half the room were just punters who wanted it to be funny, and it was really funny, and they got the laughs out of it.
Right.
And you think, this could work. Luckily, we were asked to go over and do a little pilot in LA. So we did a little pilot in LA.
How exciting!
Last year. It's called Dorks and Orcs. It's a comedy panel show, and the thing is, it's very short form, so it's about 30 minutes long, the show, or 50 minutes. You want to be 50 minutes, so it's not Critical Role, it's not Dimension 20, it's not people playing for hours and hours. So it's a format that would work on TV. It's a format that would work live on stage, and it's primarily funny. It's a comedy show that looks like Dungeons and Dragons rather than a Dungeon Dragon show. That's a bit funny.
That's it. So interesting, because certainly now with Wizards of the Coast and certainly Hollywood looking at a way to be like, how do we change actual plays to be a bit more for the mainstream and stuff? So something like this clearly is in the zeitgeist, and I know they're starting their own Wizards of the Coast channel, but there's definitely like a counterparty. They're doing ones based on cooking shows and stuff.
That's right. Yeah, Matthew Lillard's got a show on there, hasn't he?
Exactly. Like Purple Worm Kill or something.
Kill. Yeah, it sounds really good. It sounds really interesting. Yeah, we were chatting to Matthew when we were going out to LA. We were talking to Matthew about his show. Yeah, so it sounds really good.
So it feels like just another way to be like, hey, it's not just four people sat around the table. It's like you said, the short form element, which certainly America loves. They love their Whose Line Is It Anyway, and certainly improv obviously is so different over there. And it's definitely seen as a I don't want to say professional profession, but you definitely have the schools, and you get into classes and you get into acting all the way through that. So best of luck. That sounds really awesome. If we wanted to find where Game Therapy is, what's the website? Where can we find out more about your work?
Yeah, so, if you go to the website, all our socials are on there. So the website is game-therapy.co.uk, and most of our socials are at Game Therapy. So you can probably find us there. We're also at most of the conventions. I think we tend to do most of the conventions. UK Games Expo and Dragon Meet and Salute, and I think most of the conventions we're going to be at. If we're not at a convention, if you're from a convention listening, invite us and we'll turn up.
Well, brilliant. Thank you so much, Gary. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it's been a lovely chat to you.
I'm hoping to do more of these special Q&A bonus episodes in future, including Q&As on the one-shots we've run here at What Am I Rolling? If you have a question or think of an RPG designer you'd like to see interviewed on this podcast, let us know. Our email address is whatamirollingpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. Great. See you next time.